Hello, everybody. Welcome to St. Clement's. I'm Father Alexander. It's the A to Z of Catholicism. L is for Lourdes. Now, I gave this talk some years ago. I gave a talk about Lourdes. I was asked by some people in Chichester to give a talk about Lourdes. And I was just sloping off somewhere. And they said, "Where are you going? Haven't you forgotten? Haven't you remembered that you're giving a talk about Lourdes?" I said, "Oh." And so I went in and I gave the talk about Lourdes, and it was completely off the cuff. And afterwards, somebody said to me, "Could we have the text of your talk? Because most of my talks are from a set text." I said, "There is no set text. It was completely off the cuff." So, oh, that's a real pity because that was the best talk we've ever heard on Lourdes or on anything else. And then I thought, my goodness, I wonder what I said, and I couldn't really remember. So always have notes so that you can refer to them and so on and so forth. But I'm going to sort of give it another go, if you see what I mean. I'm going to talk about Lourdes, and hopefully you'll understand why Lourdes is so important. Lourdes is incredibly important, probably the most important event of the 19th century, I would say. Much more important than all the other things that people think are important in the 19th century for the Catholic Church. Now, there were 18 apparitions at Lourdes to the girl Bernadette Soubirous. 18, and the first of them was on 11th of February, which is the Feast of Our Lady of Lourdes, as it later became, and it was in 1858. Now, this year is extremely important. Crimean War had just ended, hadn't it? 1854 to 55, I think, was the Crimean War. Um, a lot had been happening in Europe. 1848, 10 years before, was the year of revolutions, when there had been revolutions all over Europe, which had been largely unsuccessful, a bit like the Arab Spring in more recent times. The 1848 is also the year in which Karl Marx wrote the Communist Manifesto. 1848 was also the year after the failed revolutions. The person who came to power in France, first as president, then as president for life, and then as emperor, was Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, Napoleon III, who was the nephew of the person the French call Napoleon the Great or Napoleon I. Louis Napoleon was a very, very, very different character to his uncle. He only met his uncle when he was 5 years old, once, I think. He was completely different to his uncle. Louis Napoleon was obviously an authoritarian. He'd seized power. He ruled, in fact, what was a police state. But Louis Napoleon was very concerned about the working poor and the unemployed. He was very concerned about the problem of poverty. When he was locked up in jail for trying to foment trouble in France, he wrote a book called The Abolition of Poverty. The time of Louis Napoleon was a time of huge industrial advancement in France, as indeed it was over the Channel in England. But it was also a time of great concern in that so many people were working in factories and living in slums, living in squalor. And there was this ever-present fear that the working classes would rise up, kill their betters, and take over the state. And this, of course, had more or less happened in 1848. The workers had risen and so on, and they'd been put down. So there was this fear of social discord, fear of revolution, and there was also, on the part of Louis Napoleon in particular, but also other people in the ruling class, this very strong desire to do something about poverty and to to alleviate the distress of the working class, which everybody acknowledged was real. Nowadays, if the workers are complaining, most people just think they should shut up and stop belly aching. But in those days, people actually took it seriously. Nice to know. In our own country, the most famous person you can think about is this Lord Shaftesbury, who's the great social reformer. So it was a time of social reform, and social reform was thought to be urgent. Louis Napoleon himself was a great social reformer. So, for example, Louis Napoleon was the man who legalized trade unions in France. Before that, they were not legal. They were illegal. Now, um, Bernadette, so poverty, the cure of poverty, Bernadette was the, I don't think it would be an exaggeration to say the poorest person in France, or one of the most poor people in France. Because, I mean, it wasn't that she was a member of the industrial working class, if only she had been so lucky. The father was an unemployed miller who survived by getting what work he could as a sort of a labourer, but nobody really wanted to employ him. The mother and the children and the father lived in one room, which was in this the place called Le Cachot, which means the lockup, which was a former police station stroke prison. And the room they lived in was the cell that was where they kept the prisoners. And if you go into Le Cachot nowadays, it's been cleaned, but for them, it was 5 people, or maybe 6, living in a room about 2/3 the size of this. If you go to the Cachot, have any of you been to Le Cachot in Lourdes? It's extraordinary. It is mind blowing that any family could have lived in so small a place. And it's all got bars on the window and so on, one window and so on. So they lived in essentially a slum. Now, they weren't exactly urban slum dwellers, again, that they should have been so lucky. They were living in a miserable town in the middle of nowhere, well, on the edge of France by the Pyrenees. So they really were in the sort of place which was not close to the pulse of national life. Places like Paris and Lyon, Marseille, and so on, these had life in them, but there was not very much life in Lourdes. And so this poor girl, not only was she from a very disadvantaged, as we'd say, background, she was also very small for her age. She was about 14, but most people thought she was about 11, probably because she was undernourished. Secondly, she was ignorant. I mean, she went to school, but she was a bit slow. Now, probably the reason she was a bit slow is because she had no time to do homework, because she was working, skivvying at home, looking after the younger brothers and things like that. And she was also tubercular. She was in poor health, and she didn't actually speak French. She spoke the patois of of Lourdes, which is called Occitan, I think. Later on, much later on, in the 1880s or 90s, the French government abolished all variants on the French language and forced everybody to speak French. But very late on, the unification of the French language, it was called. But until that time, in 1858, everybody was speaking Provençal, Occitan, and sort of, this, that, and the other. And she must have spoken some standard French as well. But at home, they spoke this patois. So she was really at the bottom of the pile. She was I suppose we would say in Marxist terms, she was oppressed. Well, we'll have a look at that in a moment. But anyway, the vision is important. What she saw is important. But also, what is important about Lourdes is the person who saw the vision, Bernadette, the seer of the vision. What did she see, and what was she told? Well, you know the story of Lourdes, I think. For 18 times, she was told by the lady, as she assumed, Aquero, that one, the lady, that she was to come to this grotto, this cave by the river, in a rather desolate area, it has to be said. And she was to build a church, and she was to say people must come here in procession, and then she was to say she was to dig with her hands, and she was to bathe in the water and to drink the water, and so on and so forth. There was no spring, but eventually one sprang up. And of course, the parish priest asked her to ask the lady who she was. And the lady, opening her arms and looking up to heaven, said, I am the Immaculate Conception. And Bernadette did not know what this meant. And the parish priest had to explain to her what the Immaculate Conception meant. Even though the the visions were over within a month, Lourdes became quite famous during that time. After about the third or fourth vision, people started to turn up. By the time of the last vision, there were thousands of people there. So it's extraordinary that the Blessed Virgin Mary should choose a God-forsaken place like Lourdes to appear and speak to the least important person in the town. It's extraordinary. Why? Well, I think the message is very clear. When God wants to speak, he will speak to, obviously via the Virgin Mary and via Bernadette, he will speak to the least important person in the room. That God calls the most insignificant people because in his eyes, nobody is insignificant. I think this is very, very important. This goes to the heart of Catholicism. I've just been preparing some talks for this day of recollection we're having. And one of the things that I led to reflect on is, of course, Protestantism is the religion of the book. And therefore, it automatically excludes those who can't read and write. You know, also, when the English turned Protestant, they translated the Bible into English, and they had a prayer book in English because Latin was not understanded of the people. They said, and of course, who revolted against this the most? The Welsh, because they could not speak English, and therefore Anglicanism never caught on in Wales. Wales became nonconformist. They had Welsh chapels where they had sermons and so on in Welsh. Now, the point about Protestantism, it goes with education. If you're an uneducated person, you can't really be a Protestant. That's why, of course, the very best university system in the world is in Germany, always has been, and maybe Switzerland, the Protestant part of Germany. So education and Protestantism go together very, very, very strongly. If you're an ignorant person and a Catholic, that also goes together quite well, I think you'll find. And quite often people dismiss Catholics as a bunch of ignorant peasants. Peasants, okay, fine. Ignorant, you don't have to have a degree in biblical studies to be a Catholic or to be a good Catholic, to be a devout Catholic. Bernadette knew nothing. Yet she was the greatest Catholic of the 19th century. Makes you reflect. Now, what this makes you reflect on is this. This is a bit of an excursus. Catholicism is the only religion in Britain, or only Christian religion in Britain, where you go to a Catholic church and you have people from all social backgrounds. Again, I'm talking like a Marxist, but some Marxist ideas are really quite useful tools to use. You go to a Catholic church and you can be, for example, if you go to Westminster Cathedral, you might have some really posh people who live in the flats around Westminster Cathedral. You might have members of the aristocracy going, and you will have a whole load of people who are hairdressers and cleaners and things like that. And that's perfectly normal. If you go to an Anglican church, and I'm not saying this as, because I despise Anglicans, because as you know, I don't. My mother was an Anglican. If you go to an Anglican church, quite often you will find all the people are the same. They're from the same background. Background is an English code word for social class. Now, for example, in a place I was once at, there was a very active Anglican church which did a lot of evangelization. They only seem to attract people from the lower middle classes. As you know, the British middle class has got so many variants in it, but these were all lower middle class people. Whereas the Methodists down the road were upper working class. The Baptists were working class. The Catholics were all classes. We even had somebody in that church who'd once been to St. Mary's Ascot. And so that, but in other words, the Anglicans had been evangelizing, but the only people they brought in were people of the lower middle classes. If you go to the most famous Anglican church in Britain, Holy Trinity Brompton, it seems to me the only people they bring in are people of the upper middle classes. In fact, upper middle classes, lower upper classes, the top band. Now, in other words, you've got to have in your evangelization, you've got to evangelize everybody, regardless of local of social class. And you've got to have that bandwidth. Do you know what I mean? Only people from a certain social class can tune into Methodism, the Baptists, the Anglicans, the evangelical Anglicans, the happy clappy Anglicans. I don't know what it is about happy clappy Anglicans, but only a certain type of people wants to be a happy clappy Anglican. What's the happy clappy Anglicans up there like by Stoneleigh Station? Anybody know? Anybody go? I don't know.
I know one or two very nice people.
They're very nice people. Of course they are.
And at one time when they were reordering the stuff, we do know that we had all of them.
Oh, did we?
We did.
Oh, in Stoneleigh. How very nice of them.
Yeah.
Oh, well, we owe them a debt. But do you see, one of the things is Catholicism and class do go together, or it's important. Well, it's not important to understand this, but it's interesting to understand the impact of social class and Catholicism, the nexus between social class and Catholicism. Bernadette, the most important Catholic of the 19th century, was from the bottom of the social spectrum. Other people, Napoleon Bonaparte, of course, and his wife, and so on and so forth, were right at the top of the Christmas tree. Napoleon himself was very pro-Catholic, but he wasn't actually much of a believer. His wife was the most fervent Catholic you've ever met. And so right at the top of French society, you had fervent Catholics. Right at the bottom, you had fervent Catholics. And all the way through, you had fervent Catholics. I think that's interesting. Do you think that's interesting? I don't think, you see, my suspicion is it doesn't. Is that if you are, let's say, a merchant banker, you wouldn't dream of going to the Happy Clappy Church in somewhere in Surrey. You might go to the Happy Clappy Church in London. Again, if you are, one of the things is most working class people never go to church anywhere. And the only ones who ever go to a church are the Catholic ones. I mean, and okay, let's say there would be churches in the countryside where they would just attract people from the countryside. So, for example, in Herefordshire, they would attract farm labourers or farm owners or farm workers and things like that. That's slightly different because places like Herefordshire are slightly outside the class system. One of the things is about Anglicanism has its biggest success in London and in the suburbs. Suburbs like, Woking and things like that. Incidentally, if you look at these independent evangelical churches, it's even more so in those, even more so. But I think your class, and I mean, some people would deny they have a class. They're in denial, of course. We've all got a class. Your class and your religion, your class determines what sort of religion you go for. Mm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. They all go to it, but I think that image is really out of date now. One of the things, for example, I'll give you a good example. Do any of you, dress up to come to church? Or do you just come as you are? You come as you are. Yeah, I know. You come as you are. In Anglicanism, there used to be a very strong tradition of having to wear a hat and gloves and things like that. And that was, that was very, very strong. And the idea of dressing up to go to church automatically excludes a whole lot of people. Yes, yes, we did, didn't we? And similarly, the only people who still do it um, are West Indians. In traditional West Indian churches, you would wear a hat, you would wear gloves, and so on and so forth, and you would dress up, even if you were. Yes, yeah. Nobody has Sunday best now, but the idea once upon a time of of having to dress up to go to church would exclude a whole load of people. Now, the other thing you've got to understand is some people go to church and feel very, very uncomfortable because I think everybody's looking at me or I just don't fit in. Now, I think if you go to a church where everybody is lower middle class and you're not, you'd feel very uncomfortable and you wouldn't go back. Or if you go to a church where everybody's very posh, you'd feel uncomfortable and wouldn't want to go back. There are a few churches like that in some very posh parts of Sussex. And in fact, I'll give you an example. There were some Catholics who have become Anglican because they wanted to join the posh people. Because Anglicanism has a much posher profile than Catholicism. Believe it or not. So you're so now. Hopefully, I think here you just turn up and you are yourself, and everybody says, "Oh, there's so and so," and that's fine. Yeah. Yes. Yes. No. In France, it wouldn't be the case, and it wouldn't be the case. It wasn't the case in France because France is Catholic, even though it might be post-Catholic, and also. And in Italy, Italy's actually a classless society. There is no social class in Italy. It's really extraordinary.
Well, I can tell you.
Yes, Luigi
my
did.
grandfather
Yes.
went off Catholic Church. That's a silly thing. He's still with them. He remembers his mother going to a church in a little village, and she had a place.
Oh yeah.
She had a place. She was poor.
Oh, I see.
So
where was that in Italy? Piccinisco, of course, yes. Can I just go and switch off the heating? Excuse me just a moment. So I think it's getting quite hot in here. Back in a sec. Well, you get that piece even in Piccinisco.
Well, I think they'll have changed now.
Yeah. I mean, you did get in places like Piccinisco, you did get the place where the landowner and his family were given special treatment, and everybody else could, go to hell. The mayor and the podesta and all these people. You did have that sort of caste system in liberal Italy, which went at that time, 1920s and so on. But modern Italy is totally classless. It really is classless. Nobody gives two hoots about the aristocracy, for example, which still exists in Italy, but nobody gives two hoots. Well, oh dear, yes. But they just don't give two hoots about that. The English have a snobbery, which still exists. Although I have to say, it doesn't exist in young people anymore. Oh, it's wearing off. It's actually evaporating at the rate of knots. Young people are not interested in snobbish things. I mean, for example, when I was at Oxford, there was a lot of snobbery. People, say, oh, I want to go to Glyndebourne, I want to go to Henley, I want to go to Wimbledon, I want to go to the Royal Opera House. I hate music, but I want to go to the Royal Opera House. Things like that. But that doesn't really happen. I think it's largely evaporated. Anyway, so God chooses everyone. I think that is the key message of Catholicism, and it's the key message of Lourdes. God chooses the least to have an honoured place in his church. Bernadette is now a great saint. Whereas, of course, and therefore, if that is true, and it is true, if God chooses the least among us, therefore the least, when they come into church, we don't notice they're the least, or we don't distinguish. We don't. What's what I'm looking for? We don't not hold it against them. We do not stratify people. We do not judge people according to their origin. I think that's really, really, really important. I really think that's important. And when you talk about we are a welcoming church, that's what you mean. Hello, where do you come from? Where are you going to sit over there? You sit anywhere. Make yourself at home. I think that's really important. Now, the other thing is, what else? What was Bernadette told by Our Blessed Lady? Pray for sinners and care for the sick. Basically, it wasn't actually told care for the sick, but sick people will come here in procession, and many will be cured. I think it's what Our Blessed Lady said. In other words, Lourdes became prayer for sinners, pray for us now in the hour of our death, amen. Pray for us sinners now in the hour of our death, amen. Say the rosary. And Bernadette actually went as the moment she saw the lady, the first thing she did was reach for her rosary beads. And secondly, look after the sick. And in fact, the first miracle happened long before the last the apparitions had finished. Now, and Lourdes became extremely popular in the 1860s. Now, in 1870, there was a real revolution in France. The fall of the emperor, caused by the Franco-Prussian War, and then the German invasion, and then the rising of the Commune in Paris, which did more damage to Paris than any other revolution had ever done. They murdered the archbishop, I think, and things like that. It was really pretty grim. And they murdered a lot of clergy because the people who were rising, the communards, were extremely anti-Catholic. They were extremely against everything that France was, Catholic, traditional, with sort of this power structure and so on and so forth. Anyway, and after 1870, France was incredibly divided. You remember the prime minister of that time, Adolphe Thiers, and he was the one who just allowed the commune to have their way, and then just sort of surrounded Paris, and then marched in and killed the lot. Those who survived were bunged off to Tahiti and places like that. The violence of the commune was appalling. The put down of the commune was equally appalling. Now, after the end of the commune, France was split down the middle. One half of France, in fact, the majority of France, was monarchist and wanted the restoration of the monarchy. They didn't get it for a variety of reasons I won't go into. The other half, less than half, were very anti-Catholic, very anti-monarchist, and very, very, and you know, the two never met. And this was particularly clear in the Dreyfus affair. Because the army was very strongly Catholic and traditional and conservative and so on and so forth. Now, Lourdes, according to the communists and Marxists, Lourdes became the meeting place of the monarchists, the conservatives, the Catholics, and those who hated the workers. And so the Marxists hated Lourdes above all else. And of course, one of the reasons for this was that the Marxists hated it because the Marxists were particularly against God, because as Marx had said, religion is the opium of the people, which isn't exactly what you think it means. It means that when you're miserable, you'll obviously find some comfort in life to keep going, and religion will comfort you. Religion is the comfort of the people. The other thing was, of course, that the Marxists really hated was charity. In Lourdes, the sick and the depressed and the poor came to Lourdes and were treated extremely well. And for the Marxists, this was terrible because it basically, being kind to the downtrodden is the last thing you should do. You should tread on the downtrodden, make them more downtrodden. Then the downtrodden will rise up in revolt. Charity puts off the revolution. So you want to make, and you see what you've got in Lourdes, which you still get to some extent, is a whole load of upper class people looking after a whole load of disadvantaged people and serving them. And that's not how it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be class warfare. And therefore, Lourdes is about social reconciliation rather than class warfare. And if you're a Marxist, it's just absolutely heartbreaking. Now, there's a guy called Michael Arditi, who's a great friend of mine, and he's written a book about it. It's a novel about Lourdes. It's called Jubilate. And a woman goes to Lourdes with her handicapped husband, who's in a wheelchair, and she notices at the airport that there are no stairs. Everything is on a level for wheelchairs. All the doors are wide. All the loos and so on have been made for wheelchairs. And she then asks herself, why can't the whole world be like Lourdes? In other words, Lourdes is a place where the sick and the handicapped are put first. Why can't the whole world be like that? Why is it that if you're in a wheelchair, the world is an impossible obstacle course for you? And oh, you can sit at the back also, this, that, the other. Why aren't you treated as the honoured guest, which you would be in Lourdes? Now, um, it's the have, as you know, with Marx, the haves and the have-nots clash and are at war until such a time as the have-nots overthrow the haves and they take what they've got, which is naturally, rightfully theirs. In Lourdes, it's not about the haves and the have-nots. Many people who go to Lourdes talk about how they learn from the sick, and that the sick and the handicapped are the ones who are able to teach them what is most important about life. So Lourdes, if you like, is a microcosm of the church, and Lourdes is the living refutation of Karl Marx's vision of class warfare. Because Lourdes is, as Jesus Christ said, the first, excuse me, the first shall be last, and the last shall be first. In Lourdes, the last are first. Now, the other thing about Lourdes, which I haven't really spoken about, I've spoken about Bernadette, and I've spoken about the sick, and I've spoken about the praying for sinners, and I've also spoken, I haven't really spoken about the way so many people come together from so many places. The international nature of the church is very much evident in Lourdes. How many of you have been to Lourdes? Oh my goodness. And what did you think? Oh my goodness. Yeah. You're still a bloke. Yeah, yeah, you're still a bloke. Yeah, yeah, yes, yes. Yeah, it breaks down a lot of barriers, doesn't it? Because one of the things we do with the sick and the handicapped is we sort of put them behind closed doors and behind high walls. You know, they go to institutions, and then we get on with our lives outside the institutions. And this is one of the few times where they interact with people. You interact with them, I think. I must say, I've only been to Lourdes once. I will go back before I die. And it's absolutely wonderful. The atmosphere of Lourdes is very wonderful. The peacefulness of Lourdes is very wonderful, and the there's sort of a sobriety to it. I thought anyway. I believe. Did you go with the diocese, or what did you? Where did you go?
I went with my son, who had meningitis when he was a baby.
Oh no, poor boy.
And by the time he was 13 months old, this parish
Mm.
paid for us to
Oh,
go to
good.
Lourdes.
Well, that's good, isn't it?
Yeah, but I didn't want to go.
Okay.
I was still struggling with what had happened to my son, and I was struggling with the thought that I had to travel somewhere
Yeah.
to possibly get a healing.
Yeah.
When I felt that it could happen here.
Yeah, it
But
could.
there were two big things I think I got from it. One was the international aspect of it, being in the grotto and saying Hail Mary in the evening,
Yeah.
half in my own language,
Yes.
and then half listening to
Yes.
everybody else in the language.
Yeah. Yeah.
That gave me a tremendous peace.
Yes.
And the other thing was, rather than actually ending up wanting a cure,
Uh-huh.
I learned that the most important thing
It's acceptance.
was who he was going to be as a person.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And that he was alive.
Yeah.
But it was the what I was going to take back with me was to help him develop as a full person.
Yeah.
And that he was to be kind and
Yeah.
everything that he would want him to be, and that the disability was secondary
Yeah.
to his
Yeah.
character.
Yeah. I think that, you know, we tend to judge people by the externals rather than the internals. And Lourdes is telling us, I think, to judge them by the internals, isn't it? I think I don't know anybody who's been to Lourdes and said they couldn't stand it or they thought it was ghastly. Or
I think what I found hard was going down by the grotto and all the different candles were for sale. And there was a feeling that if you bought a small candle, which really was what I could afford,
yes.
your prayers were not going to be
Oh no
as
no no no
important
no.
as the big candle.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
it brought the rebel out of
Yes.
me.
Yes. Yes.
I
Oh
did
my
find
goodness.
that
yes. Oh, the actual tax shops. The commercial side is pretty tacky, but of course that's all outside the domain of the shrine, thankfully.
People who I travel with, we stay at
Uh-huh.
um,
I hope we're getting this on the. Yeah, go on.
a young man from this parish,
Yeah.
Christmas,
Oh yeah.
who took me on,
Yeah.
and my son on. He regularly gave me breaks.
Oh, good.
We spent time with Luke and the others in the group. It was
Mhm,
very,
mhm.
it was a wonderful.
Well, you see, a microcosm of the Catholic Church. Wouldn't the Catholic Church be wonderful if everybody in the Catholic Church, as they are in Lourdes, was completely generous? You know, we are, I suppose, we try to be generous, but if we could be like that all the time, if every Catholic church was like Lourdes, imagine how different it would be. But I mean, I think our Catholic churches, this one, the things I've spoken about, there, all of them can take place in Lourdes, but they could also take place at home as well, can't they? Have you been? And what was it? Yeah, like me. Yeah, it rained. I went in October. I think it rained quite a lot. Yes. Oh. Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. 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 Yes. Yes. I think probably if you want to sum up the word, the Catholic Church, the word communion is the most important. You know, we are in communion with each other. I think that's important. Now, of course, the other thing about Lourdes is the Blessed Virgin Mary appeared at Lourdes. And it's very interesting. There's a woman called Ruth Harris, who is a fellow of Exeter College in Oxford, who's written the best book about Lourdes. She's not a believer, in fact, she's Jewish. It's a brilliant book. And in it, of course, she describes what Bernadette saw. Bernadette, how she describes Our Blessed Lady. And she said Our Blessed Lady seemed to be about 12 years old, which is mind boggling. And she had this beautiful white dress and this blue sash, and she had roses on her feet. And you think, surely this cannot be the case. But of course, it is the case. That is what she saw, because what Bernadette saw was the idealization of herself. A beautiful young lady with roses on her feet. In those days, believe it or not, people did used to wear roses on their feet when they went to balls. So she was wearing sort of a ball gown and so on and so forth. And what Our Blessed Lady represents is she's a presence in the church, um, and she points to the nature of the church. She is warm, she is loving, she is caring, she is beautiful. That I think is, what Our Blessed Lady is supposed to be. She, so much of religion can be grim and Calvinistic and forbidding and guilt and sin and penance and chains and the Spanish Inquisition and so on and so forth, and just sort of people sitting around sort of declaiming biblical texts and wearing black and white clothing and horrible hats. A lot of that is we know about. But the point of the Blessed Virgin Mary, she represents tota pulchra est, O Maria. You are all fair, O Mary. In other words, the beauty of God is seen in the Blessed Virgin Mary, and she is calling us to live beautiful lives. I don't know if you feel this call to live a beautiful life, any of you, or do you think, or do you all, live a beautiful life? I think that's what God is saying to us in the Blessed Virgin Mary. And she says to Bernadette, I cannot promise you happiness in this world, but only in the next. And which is it's a heartbreakingly honest, because Bernadette would be killed by the diseases she already presumably had at that early age. And but in the next, but Bernadette's life, even though she was crippled by illness and so on, it was a beautiful life. The place where Our Blessed Lady appeared was sort of a rubbish dump, wasn't it? Massive Bay, by the side of the river. It's And yet, in the middle of this ghastly rubbish dump, because they'd come to look for old bones or something, as it were, they were scavenging through a rubbish dump, essentially, like Smoky Mountain in Manila. In the beauty breaks through. And I think that that's the one of the point about Catholicism, that people should come to church and have a beautiful experience. I don't mean to say they should be entertained, but they should have an, a sense that life, that there is beauty beyond this life, I think. And Lourdes is, even though it's full of people who are terribly unwell, and illness is not a beautiful thing, there's no doubt about it. Lourdes is a beautiful place because the illness has been transcended by the reaction to the illness, which is love, care, and so on and so forth. And therefore, things become beautiful. Illness is never beautiful, but Florence Nightingale was always doing things with horrible, stinking bandages. Yet she's a beautiful figure, isn't she? The lady with the lamp. But she worked in the most awful situation, I should imagine. We're very lucky we have Our Lady of Lourdes. The Anglicans have Florence Nightingale. So I hear there's a bit of a disappointment. And if you ever read the biography of Florence Nightingale, written by that man, a Lytton Strachey, gosh, he says some horrible things about her, which I'm sure she was a perfectly nice lady. But she's well, according to Lytton Strachey, she just sort of fastened on the sick because she was sort of wanted to be famous or something. I mean, no, I mean, I'm sure she was a really nice person. Lots of people have really taken it out on Florence Nightingale. Nobody can take it out on Our Blessed Lady. The communists hate Jesus Christ because they're always saying he didn't exist, which is a great way of getting rid of him. But they never say anything bad about Our Lady. If you go to what used to be the Communist quarters in Rome, now the Italian Communist Party, the largest in the world, sadly defunct. Goodbye, don't call us, we won't call you. Next, on the wall of the Communist headquarters, there's a picture of Our Lady surrounded by ex-voters. Amazing. I mean, they were fools, the communists. How did they? Maybe they could defeat the Pope, maybe they could defeat Jesus Christ, but they could never, ever defeat the Blessed Virgin. So the Blessed Virgin is one of the secret weapons of Catholicism. More people have been brought to God by the Blessed Virgin than any other person. Would you agree? Right. I've spoken long enough. Any talk, any feedback, any, have you learned something? Yeah? Yeah? Yeah. Okay. Anything you want to say? Well, you've said something already, but
Can I
yeah.
say that if you read the story of Saint Teresa of Lisieux,
yes,
and more, the most disappointed person in Lourdes was her mother.
Oh, why?
They went to Lourdes, came back, not interested.
Oh, really? That's
That comes across,
Oh, does it? It's very... But Thérèse of Lisieux and, of course, Lourdes, if you look at France between 1870 and essentially 1940, the big things in Catholicism were the cult of St. Martin of Tours, the cult of the Little Flower, the cult of Lourdes. And of course, the other thing is, which is probably the most wonderful place on earth, even better than Lourdes, is the Sacré-Cœur on Montmartre, the La Butte de Montmartre, the Hill of the Martyrs, which the Catholics built after 1870 as expiation for the crimes of the Commune. And of course, the Commune and their friends got very, very shirty about that. They hate Montmartre because Montmartre dominates Paris. It's a reassertion of the La France de toujours, the France as it's always been, that France is Catholic and it belongs to Christ, and it shows Jesus Christ inside with a crown on his head. So France is a monarchy, but the monarch is Jesus. And if you go into Sacré-Cœur, who's been to Sacré-Cœur? Yeah. What sort of people do you see in Sacré-Cœur? Ordinary people. No, well, no. Yeah, you gotta get with this other thing. You see a lot of French actually, who are, of course, black people, who are French, living in France. The poorest people in France are all there. A wonderful place. And at the bottom you have Pigalle, which of course is the red light district, which is also full of those questionable people, all of whom are very devoted to Our Blessed Lady, I am sure. Okay, so well, it's true. It's true. There was a very interesting story about how the Archdiocese of Paris decided to open a restaurant in Pigalle, which would serve nourishing meals at all times of day for people who worked in the Pigalle district. And what's more, the waiters were um, priests of the Paris Archdiocese, including the Archbishop. So you go in and give your order, and the Archbishop will come and say, well, "What will you have for us?" You know, yeah, nah, sorry, love, that's off. He'd say, or whatever, you know. But no, it was a French restaurant, so it was very good. And then the upper class people discovered it. They decided they wanted to go there too, and so it rather lost its purpose. So I've been told. Anyway, but that's good because Catholicism is for everybody. We've got to remember that Catholicism is for everybody. And when you actually take that on, it's quite a revolutionary thing, isn't it? Yes. Are we finished? All the best. Good night. Let me switch that off. There we are.